What if a single night could change everything? What if someone quietly watching in the shadows turned out to be the one person who could make it right? This is the story of Cameron, and the night dignity finally had its moment. It was a night like any other at the Silverlight Bay Hotel. The clock approached midnight, and the lobby had settled into that special kind of stillness that feels almost sacred. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers, mingling with the gentle hum of the climate system. Cameron stood at the front desk, arranging a fresh bouquet of lilies, pristine white, elegant in their simplicity. A small ritual he performed every night. After 15 years in hospitality, Cameron had come to believe that exceptional service lives in these little, often unnoticed details. His fingers lingered on the smooth petals, adjusting them just so, with a gentleness that revealed everything about who he was. Unlike many of his colleagues who saw the late shift as a burden, Cameron found peace in these quiet hours. The marble lobby gleamed under warm lighting, reflecting polished brass fixtures that had become as familiar to him as his own reflection. This hotel had been his second home, his sanctuary in a world that often looked past people like him. Every night at 2 a.m., when his shift ended, Cameron would return to his modest one-bedroom apartment in the less fashionable part of town. There, his mother's medications would be arranged in perfect order on the nightstand, her arthritis worse after years of cleaning homes for families who never bothered to learn her name. He would check on her sleeping form, adjust her blanket, and then eat his simple dinner of whatever he'd prepared the night before. The contrast between the opulence he maintained during his shift and the simplicity of his own life was something he'd made peace with long ago. While the Harringtons of the world dined on Wagyu beef and sipped vintage champagne, Cameron carefully portioned out his week's groceries to make ends meet. Yet there was a dignity in his simplicity that the wealthy guests he served often lacked in their excess. Cameron didn't notice the visitor at first. The man entered quietly, almost like a shadow slipping through the revolving doors. He wore a dark blazer over a slightly wrinkled t-shirt, his long hair slightly tousled. He carried himself with an unassuming presence that somehow filled the room. He looked like someone who traveled 1,000 miles in his soul that day. But there was something about him, a quiet intensity, a gentle observance that made you feel both seen and safe. He didn't announce himself, just gave Cameron a respectful nod and asked if he could sit down for a while. Cameron smiled warmly and gestured toward the buttery leather chairs in the corner beneath the cascading indoor waterfall. Just another late-night traveler seeking refuge, he thought. Rough day. Cameron ventured, breaking his usual professional distance. Something about the quiet demeanor of the visitor invited conversation. The man smiled slightly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Long one. Sometimes you just need a moment of peace before facing your room, you know. Cameron nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. As someone who spent more time in the hotel than in his own apartment, he knew the strange limbo of transitional spaces, the in-between moments where you belong nowhere and everywhere. The lobby's all yours, he said. Coffee? It's fresh, I just made it an hour ago. The man shook his head. I'm good, thanks. This is perfect. The quiet. Cameron returned to his work, updating room availability for the following day, preparing the morning shift's briefing notes, and taking a moment to address a small scuff on the marble counter with a specialized cleaning cloth. The visitor in the corner remained still, occasionally glancing through what appeared to be a script, making small notes in the margins with a pencil. What Cameron didn't know then was that this man had a purpose for watching. Cameron's stomach tightened as the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. He steadied his breath as Victoria and Richard Harrington stepped into the lobby. He'd known them for years, long-time guests with the kind of wealth that insulated them from the realities most people face. Demanding. Entitled. The kind of people who believed their platinum credit cards gave them ownership over anyone wearing a name tag. The memory of his previous encounters with guests like the Harringtons flashed through Cameron's mind. 3 years ago, an investment banker had thrown a room service tray at his feet because the steak had arrived with béarnaise sauce instead of peppercorn. "People like you," the man had sneered, "are why standards in this country are slipping." Last summer, a fashion executive had openly suggested to the manager that perhaps they should upgrade their front desk staff to match their 5-star rating, while Cameron stood there, invisible and diminished. And just last month, a celebrity chef had loudly proclaimed that Cameron lacked the sophistication to properly represent the brand image, simply because Cameron had respectfully suggested an alternative restaurant when their first choice was fully booked. Each time, Cameron had swallowed the humiliation, smiled politely, and continued on. Each time, a small piece of his spirit had been chipped away, replaced with practiced resilience that shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. This isn't just Cameron's story, it's the story of anyone who's ever been dismissed without being seen. If this is you, drop a plant in the comments. The Harringtons were banking executives from Boston who stayed at the Silverlight at least once a month. Their reservations always came with a lengthy list of special requirements, specific thread counts for their sheets, particular brands of sparkling water, precise room temperature settings, and always the corner suite on the 14th floor with the harbor view. The staff had a nickname for them, the Hurricanes, because they left devastation in their wake, from tearful housekeepers to flustered kitchen staff. Victoria was already complaining, her voice deliberately pitched to carry across the marble floor. "This establishment has completely deteriorated," she announced, waving her diamond-adorned hands dismissively, as if she could banish the perceived inadequacies with a flick of her wrist. "Even the 5-star restaurants here aren't what they used to be. I mean, is it too much to ask for proper service anymore?" The Dover sole was completely overcooked, and they had the audacity to serve domestic caviar instead of beluga. Richard nodded solemnly, his gray hair perfectly coiffed, his expression grave as if they were discussing a national tragedy rather than a slightly delayed room service order. "It's the management," he replied, loud enough for Cameron to hear. "Standards slip from the top down. It's a shame what's happening to these established institutions." Then they approached the front desk, their designer shoes clicking against the floor like a countdown. "You?" Victoria said sharply, her eyes narrowing as they swept over Cameron. "We had room service earlier. It was absolutely ridiculous. The steak was medium when Richard clearly specified medium rare, and the wine wasn't properly decanted. I want to speak to someone in charge. Immediately." Cameron kept his voice measured and professional, the same way he had through countless similar encounters. "I'm the senior desk attendant tonight, ma'am. I'd be happy to address your concerns and make things right." Her eyes narrowed further, lips pursing into a thin line of disapproval. "Is there someone else available? Someone more senior?" The air shifted. The quiet hostility elegantly wrapped in polite euphemisms filled the space between them. Richard stepped closer, adding with a smirk that didn't quite reach his cold eyes, "We were expecting someone more appropriate for our level of patronage." They weren't talking about Cameron's qualifications or experience. They weren't talking about his dedication to this job or the countless times he'd gone above and beyond for guests just like them. They were talking about him. About how he looked. About what he didn't represent in their carefully curated worldview. If you were in Cameron's shoes in that moment, would you? 1. Stay calm and professional. 2. Speak up and defend yourself. Cameron tightened his grip on the polished counter but maintained his professional demeanor. The knot in his chest tightened, a familiar feeling, like an old scar that never quite stops aching. "Our night manager is currently off property, but I assure you I'm fully capable of handling any concerns you might have. I've been with Silverlight for 15 years. Victoria's perfectly maintained eyebrows rose slightly. 15 years. Well, that explains the complacency. Perhaps it's time for fresh perspectives. Richard checked his watch again, an ostentatious platinum Patek Philippe that probably cost more than Cameron's annual salary. "We'll speak with Margaret in the morning," he said, referring to the general manager by her first name, a privilege he believed wealth afforded him. "I'd be happy to make a note for Ms. Winters about your concerns," Cameron offered, still clinging to professionalism like a life raft. "And I can certainly arrange for complimentary breakfast service and perhaps a special amenity to apologize for your dinner experience." "We'll wait," Richard said with a condescending shrug, checking his Rolex as if to emphasize the value of his time. "We'd rather speak to someone who truly understands our expectations and the level of service we're accustomed to." They turned and walked away, settling into plush chairs across the lobby, their judgment hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Cameron stood there, burning inside with 15 years of similar moments, but he swallowed it. Again. Like he always did. Like he had been taught to do. Have you ever been judged by your appearance or your job title? Type yes if it's happened to you, no if not. The man in the blazer, he hadn't moved from his spot. But his eyes remained on Cameron. Not judging. Just witnessing. There was something in that gaze that felt different, like truly seeing someone for the first time after years of invisibility. An hour crawled by. The night audit reports blurred before Cameron's tired eyes as he tried to focus on anything but the weight of shame they'd placed on his shoulders. He processed the day's transactions, balanced the accounts, and prepared the morning briefing with practiced efficiency. But his mind kept returning to the Harringtons and their casual cruelty, the kind that leaves no visible marks but cuts deep nonetheless. The Harringtons had moved to the bar, which had remained open late for VIP guests. Victoria's laugh occasionally cut through the lobby's tranquility, sharp and artificial. The visitor in the corner remained, seemingly absorbed in his reading, occasionally glancing up at the ornate ceiling or the dramatic floral arrangement in the center of the lobby. Cameron thought the worst of the night was done. It wasn't. The elevator dinged again, and Victoria and Richard stormed out, this time in plush hotel robes embroidered with the Silverlight logo, their feet shuffling in monogrammed slippers. Victoria's cheeks were flushed with self-righteous indignation, her voice crackling with frustration. "It's absolutely freezing in our suite," she barked, her diamond earrings catching the light as she gesticulated wildly. "We've tried adjusting the thermostat repeatedly. It's obviously malfunctioning, and I'm completely done dealing with you and your incompetence." Before Cameron could even formulate a response, Richard raised his phone, his expression triumphant. "We've already posted about this. Online. Our social media accounts have thousands of followers. You'll deeply regret acting like you belong in a position of authority here." Cameron's heart plummeted to the pit of his stomach, a cold dread washing over him. If this moment hit you hard, tap that like button, it tells us this message matters. It wasn't just about this moment anymore. It wasn't just about swallowing his pride and getting through one more difficult interaction. They were going to destroy his name. His job. The career he'd built carefully over 15 years. The life he'd managed to create for himself despite the odds. For a moment, Cameron thought he'd lose everything he had worked for. All the silent sacrifices, the missed family gatherings, the late nights, the endless smile he'd maintained through countless indignities, all of it meant nothing. He could be erased with a single post from people who had never once asked his name despite seeing him dozens of times. The weight of that realization crushed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. He pictured his mother's face when he told her he'd finally made senior desk attendant, her pride, her relief that the sacrifices she'd made for his education hadn't been in vain. He thought about the small apartment he'd finally been able to afford in a decent neighborhood, the modest savings he'd accumulated, the stability he'd carved out from nothing. All of it suddenly threatened by wealthy strangers who saw him as nothing more than a disappointment to their expectations of what a luxury hotel employee should look like. That's when footsteps approached. Calm, steady. The man in the blazer walked toward the desk, each step deliberate and unhurried. He stepped into the warm glow of the lobby lights. And everything changed. The man moved with quiet purpose, each step echoing softly across the marble floor. Time seemed to slow. The harsh overhead lights caught in his long hair, creating a momentary halo effect that felt almost symbolic in retrospect. Cameron's hands trembled slightly on the counter. Victoria's painted lips parted in curiosity. Richard's expression hardened, preparing to dismiss another interruption. And then, as the stranger stood directly under the crystal chandelier, his features fully illuminated for the first time that night, Victoria's perfectly lined lips parted slightly. Her expression transformed from arrogance to disbelief in the span of a heartbeat. "Wait, are you?" she stammered, her composure crumbling. The silence that followed stretched like an eternity. The air in the lobby seemed to hold its breath. The man gave a small, humble nod. "Keanu Reeves," he said simply, his voice low and warm. The two words hung in the air, transforming everything they touched. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked as though he'd been struck by lightning, his earlier smugness evaporating instantly. If you're moved by stories like this one, hit subscribe. This channel is where everyday dignity takes the spotlight. "I was hoping for a quiet stay," Keanu said, his voice gentle yet somehow filling the entire lobby. "But I seem to have witnessed something that troubles me deeply." Cameron stood there, frozen in place. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Keanu turned to Victoria and Richard, his demeanor calm, collected, radiating a quiet power that commanded attention without demanding it. "You posted about him online?" he asked, gesturing toward Cameron with a respectful nod. They scrambled to explain themselves, tripping over words and excuses. "We didn't know you were here, we were just frustrated with the service, it wasn't personal, we just have certain standards." Keanu extended his hand, and without hesitation, Richard surrendered his phone. Keanu read the post, his expression unchanging but his eyes reflecting a profound disappointment. The language wasn't explicitly hateful, but the message was crystal clear to anyone reading between the lines: avoid this place. Staff is subpar and doesn't fit the image of luxury. Standards have completely deteriorated. Managed by people who don't belong in hospitality. He handed the phone back, his movements deliberate. "You believe you were disrespected by someone who has dedicated 15 years to this establishment? Who, from what I've observed, has a reputation for excellence and professionalism?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "If you were Cameron in this moment, would you forgive or stand firm?" Comment 1 for forgiveness, 2 for firm boundaries. They offered no response, suddenly finding the marble floor fascinating. Keanu looked at Cameron. Nodded once. A simple gesture that somehow carried the weight of validation Cameron had silently craved for years. "I see you. I recognize your worth. I've got your back." He turned back to them. "Because from what I've witnessed tonight, Cameron has demonstrated nothing but grace, patience, and consummate professionalism. Far more than he was given in return." Then he said the words no one expected to hear. "I should probably mention, I recently acquired ownership of this hotel." The color drained from their faces simultaneously, leaving them ashen under the lobby lights. "You're the new owner?" Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. Keanu didn't flinch. "Yes. Part of a portfolio of properties I've invested in. And what you've posted doesn't just hurt Cameron personally. It doesn't just damage the reputation of this establishment. It reveals something profound about who you choose to be when you believe no one of consequence is watching. He paused, his eyes reflecting a quiet intensity. Power doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how you treat people, especially those you think can't fight back. That's the true measure of character. Victoria looked as though she might faint, her perfectly manicured hand clutching at the lapel of her robe. "Mr. Reeves, we had no idea." "That's exactly the point," Keanu interrupted gently. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat people with basic human dignity." Richard's phone still displayed the damaging post. "We'll delete this immediately." "Of course. A misunderstanding. We were just tired and—" "I don't think I'm the one you should be addressing," Keanu said, looking pointedly at Cameron. They stumbled over fresh apologies, each more desperate than the last. They promised to delete the post immediately. To write a glowing review instead. To make a substantial donation to the charity of Keanu's choice. Anything to make this awkward situation disappear. Then Keanu looked at Cameron, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that took the desk attendant's breath away. "This is your call, Cameron," he said. "These people disrespected you, not me. How do you want to handle this situation?" Cameron felt the weight of 15 years of swallowed responses, of carefully maintained professionalism in the face of subtle and not so subtle indignities. He took a deep breath, feeling something shift within him. In that moment, with the eyes of Keanu Reeves and the Harringtons on him, Cameron felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about him or this particular incident. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel smaller, less worthy, because of someone else's prejudice or sense of entitlement. "I appreciate an apology," he said, his voice steadier than expected. "But words alone don't erase actions. If you're genuinely sorry, not just because you've been caught by someone famous, then delete the post, write something that honestly reflects your experience without the personal attacks, and most importantly, learn to treat every person with basic human dignity. No matter what they look like. No matter their job title. No matter if you think they're important or not." Victoria's eyes darted between Keanu and Cameron, clearly calculating the social and financial implications of this encounter. "Of course. We completely understand. We'll make this right." And, Cameron added, surprising himself with his boldness, "I'd like you to apologize to our housekeeping staff tomorrow morning. Maria specifically. She spent 3 hours preparing your suite to your exact specifications, including steaming all your clothes and arranging your toiletries in alphabetical order, as requested." Richard looked momentarily taken aback but quickly nodded. "Yes, absolutely. First thing tomorrow." "The thermostat issue," Cameron continued, finding his voice growing stronger, "I can address immediately. Our engineering team is on call, and I'll personally escort them to your room to ensure it's resolved to your satisfaction. This hotel prides itself on guest comfort, regardless of how we're treated in return." Keanu's mouth quirked in what might have been a suppressed smile. They nodded quickly, thoroughly chastened, and retreated toward the elevators without another word, the soft ding of the arriving car the only punctuation to their exit. As the elevator doors closed behind the Harringtons, Keanu turned to Cameron and gently said, "You handled that with more grace than most people ever could." Cameron didn't respond right away. His throat tightened. "Thank you," he finally managed. "For seeing me." Keanu gave a small smile. "The world needs to start seeing people like you. And maybe tonight, it finally did." Later that morning, as the first rays of sunrise painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and promise, Keanu held an impromptu meeting with the entire hotel staff. The night housekeepers, the early morning kitchen crew, the maintenance team, everyone gathered in the banquet hall, curious and a little starstruck. He told them what had happened. Not to embarrass Cameron, but to establish something important. He told them that no one, absolutely no one, deserved to be mistreated or diminished simply because someone else possessed money, influence, or privilege. Every single person who works here, he said, looking each staff member in the eye, deserves to be treated with the same respect we show our most distinguished guests. That's not just good ethics, it's good business. The heart and soul of hospitality isn't found in marble countertops or thread counts, it's found in the people who make this place come alive every day. The room was silent, every person absorbing his words. Maria, the housekeeper Cameron had mentioned to the Harringtons, wiped away a tear. Jorge from maintenance stood a little straighter. Emily, the shy new hostess at the restaurant, looked as though she'd been given a precious gift. I've stayed in hotels around the world, Keanu continued, from 7-star palaces to roadside motels. And I can tell you this, the difference is never the building. It's never the amenities. It's always, always the people. It's the housekeeper who notices you're left-handed and adjusts the placement of items in your room. It's the maintenance worker who fixes your air conditioning at 3 a.m. without complaint. It's the front desk attendant who remembers that you prefer extra pillows and a room away from the elevator. He glanced at Cameron with a small nod of acknowledgement. We live in a world that often measures worth by wealth, fame, or power, he said quietly. But that's not what I see when I look around this room. I see people who bring dignity to their work every day, regardless of whether that work is recognized or appreciated. He didn't just speak. He acted. Right there, he worked with the management team to create a new standard. A written policy. A promise that this hotel would protect its people as fiercely as it protected its prestigious reputation. He called it the Dignity in Service Accord. It contained specific guidelines about how guests could address staff, procedures for handling disrespectful behavior, and, most importantly, a clear statement that the hotel reserved the right to ask guests to leave if they violated these standards, regardless of their status or spending power. This isn't about being punitive, Keanu explained. It's about creating an environment where respect flows in both directions. Margaret Winters, the general manager who had always seemed more concerned with placating difficult guests than supporting her staff, looked simultaneously uncomfortable and inspired. She had built her career on the principle that the customer was always right, even when they were objectively wrong, and here was a new owner suggesting a radical shift in philosophy. Mr. Reeves, she ventured cautiously, while I completely support the sentiment, I'm concerned about potential pushback from our high-value clients. Keanu considered her words thoughtfully. I understand that concern. But I believe we have an opportunity to redefine what high value means. A guest who spends lavishly but creates a toxic environment costs us more than money, they cost us talent, morale, and ultimately, our reputation. A truly high-value client understands that mutual respect is part of the luxury experience. Margaret nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. That makes a great deal of sense. A week later, Cameron was the one who got to unveil the Accord in the lobby, prominently displayed in an elegant frame. As he hung it on the wall, he couldn't help but glance directly at the security camera in the corner, the same one that had silently witnessed his humiliation and redemption. He held its gaze for just a moment, a small smile of gratitude forming on his lips, as if somehow Keanu might see it someday and know the depth of the change he had created. The frame hung perfectly beside a new vase of flowers. This time, purple orchids. Strong. Resilient. Complex in their beauty. Just like the people who truly make this place worthy of 5 stars. In the months that followed, something remarkable happened at the Silverlight Bay Hotel. Staff turnover dropped to nearly zero. Employee satisfaction soared. And most surprisingly to the industry analysts who watched with fascination, guest satisfaction ratings reached unprecedented heights. Because it turns out that when people feel valued, they create value beyond measure. The Harringtons never returned to the Silverlight. But countless others came, drawn by rumors of a hotel where something special was happening. A place where luxury wasn't just defined by thread counts and chef pedigrees, but by the authentic human connection that had become their signature. Keanu visited occasionally, always without fanfare, often spending time in the staff cafeteria rather than the executive offices. He remembered names, asked about families, celebrated work anniversaries. He embodied the principles of the accord he had helped create. One evening, about 6 months after that fateful night, Cameron found himself arranging lilies at the front desk, a ritual that had once been routine but now carried deeper meaning. "They're beautiful," said a voice, and he looked up to see Maria, the housekeeper who had once been reduced to tears by Victoria Harrington's demands. "Thank you," he replied, adjusting a stem slightly. Maria smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You know, my daughter graduated from hospitality school last week. She was going to work for one of those big corporate chains, but I showed her our dignity in service accord." "Oh?" Cameron asked, curious where this was going. "She turned down their offer," Maria said proudly. "She's coming here instead. She said she wants to work somewhere that understands what hospitality really means." Cameron felt a lump form in his throat. That's wonderful, Maria." She nodded. "You know, what happened that night, it didn't just change things here. My daughter is sharing the accord with her classmates. They're talking about it, demanding something similar from potential employers. It's spreading." And spread it did. Within 3 months, a former Silverlight employee who had moved to Tokyo to pursue a management opportunity brought the accord to her new hotel. The ownership, seeing the impact it had on staff morale and guest feedback, implemented their own version. Photos of the framed policy began circulating on hospitality industry forums and social media. A luxury hotel in Singapore adapted it. Then one in Dubai. Then New York, London, and Paris. A single moment of kindness had ignited a movement. A quiet stand for dignity had become a revolution in how the hospitality industry saw itself and its people. Sometimes Cameron still thought about that night, when the lobby was quiet and the lilies stood tall in their crystal vase. How the simple act of being seen, truly seen, by someone who could have simply looked away changed everything. Not just for him, but for every person who walks through those doors wearing a name tag. And sometimes, when the lobby grows quiet late at night, Cameron catches Keanu sitting in that same leather chair during his occasional visits. Watching. Noticing. Reminding all through his quiet presence that dignity isn't just a policy on the wall. It's a revolution of the heart that changes everything it touches. From that night forward, every front desk at the Silverlight Bay Hotel featured a distinctive arrangement: pristine white lilies encircled by vibrant purple orchids, symbols of grace and resilience standing together. These weren't just flowers. They were a silent statement that this space was different, that the invisible had been seen, that power could be used to lift rather than diminish, that luxury at its finest comes not from things but from how we honor the humanity in one another. Because sometimes, being truly seen is the greatest gift of all. And maybe, that's what we all need. That night, Cameron didn't just survive injustice, he sparked a quiet revolution. A reminder that true leadership doesn't shout. It sees. It protects. It uplifts. And sometimes it simply sits in the lobby, watching with kindness in its eyes. If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to truly see someone who's often overlooked. Leave a comment with the word "respect" if you believe dignity should never be optional. And if stories like this restore your hope in humanity, subscribe to Motivation for Success. If you know someone who works hard and is often overlooked, share this video with them. You might be their Keanu today. What's one quiet act of kindness you've witnessed or received that changed everything for you? Tell us in the comments. We read every story. Because sometimes, the most powerful change starts with a single quiet act of kindness.